go. Let's start off with our homework. Did anybody have fun with your homework this week?
I did.
So my mother-in-law was reviewing her homework today, and I heard her from the other room saying, these people are whiners.
That was my first thought. There's a lot of grumbling going on.
I wrote it down, grumbling.
Reminds me of us down here.
Yeah.
It's like whining all the time about everything. And that's one of the things we're going to look at. We've been talking about in our Let There Be Light. We talked first about God's word. He spoke the word, let there be light. We talked about Abraham and God making his promises, and that the covenant that he made with Abraham when he walked between the sacrifice. And then last time we talked about Moses and him seeing God in the burning bush and having God's presence. And so if you saw a pattern in your homework verses, you saw the pattern that I wanted you to see, and that was, man, those people are whiners.
God still took care of them.
God, oh my goodness. So that's what our focus is going to be this week, is God's provision and protection for a people who, by the way, I don't think really deserved it. They didn't act like they were thankful for anything. Very entitled people, don't you think?
Yeah.
Does that sound familiar to us at all these days? Okay, so we're gonna look. Let me see if I can get this. I'm trying to get this picture. Here we go. We got a picture of Karen. I don't know why we see a picture of Karen instead of a picture of the person talking. Let's see. No, I don't want that.
I myself.
Oh, I could get rid of all the pictures all together. Does that work? What do you guys like? Can you see me?
Yes, we see you and PowerPoint.
Okay, so you see me and the PowerPoint.
Yes. The PowerPoint's big and you're in a little screen.
Okay, but it's not covering up any of the words or anything.
No.
Okay, that's good. All right, we're going to turn over to Exodus chapter 19, and you'll see this is kind of in the middle of all of your homework verses that you read. We're going to do a lot of reading today. So if you don't want to read, that's fine, but we are going to do a lot of reading today. I can try and teach you all the wonderful things that I've learned, but I can't compare with what we can learn from reading the Bible ourselves. So we're going to start with Exodus chapter 19, and we're going to read verse 1 through 11. Does anybody want to volunteer to go first?
I'll read.
Okay.
On the third new moon, after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from Rephidim and came into the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. There Israel encamped before the mountain, while Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him out of the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did in the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. So Moses came down and called the elders of the people and set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. All the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. And Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am coming to you in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you, and may also believe you forever. When Moses told the words of the people to the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments. Did you say read to 10? Okay, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Did you say read to 10?
11.
Wash their garments and be ready for the third day. For on the third day, the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people.
Okay, so God is going to show up, and he's going to show up on Mount Sinai, and he tells them a couple of things. And I kind of want you to be watching this. There's another slide later on, but I kind of want you to be watching this pattern. That remember the covenant that God made with Abraham. That was an unconditional covenant. Abraham didn't have to do anything. God made that covenant himself. In what we're reading today, God is getting ready to make a covenant with the nation of Israel, and this one is a conditional covenant. So like in verse 5, he says, if you will obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you will be my own special treasure from among all the people of the earth. And so there's a condition there that you have to do this. And then in chapters 20 through 23, God lists all the expectations that he has for this covenant is all listed out. Chapter 20, you might be familiar, is where we first see the 10 commandments, is in Exodus chapter 20. So chapter 20, 21, 22, 23 are all the conditions of the covenant. Sorry, we got to go back and do 19, verse 16 through 20. Somebody want to read that?
And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the nether part of the mount. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long, and the waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. And the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mount, and the Lord called Moses up to the top of the mount, and Moses went up.
So we look at this and we see, okay, you've got all these people standing at the bottom of Mount Sinai, and they're seeing this cloud with thunders and lightning, and they're hearing this voice. They're hearing those voices that sounds like thunder, and they recognize that this was God, that God was right there speaking to Moses, and he warned them not to come near the mountain, that Moses was the only one that was supposed to go up. So let's turn over to Exodus 23, because this is part of all the promises that God is making. And I started to do this chart and I started to fill it all in. And then I thought, no, I'm going to let you all do some work. So we're going to read Exodus 23. I'm going to read Exodus 23, 20 through 33. And this is what I want you guys to do. I want you to pay attention to the promises that God makes and the conditions that that Israel has to abide by. So this is what I'm going to do. We're going to see if this works. Okay. I'm going to read some. And then if you see a promise, when I pause, I want you to yell out promise. And if you hear a condition, I'm pausing, I want you to yell out condition. You think this is going to work?
Try.
Okay. We're going to try it. I have this example here. Starting in verse 20, it says, behold, I'm going to send an angel before you to keep you and guard you on the way and bring you to the place that I have prepared. So that's a promise God's making. And an angel, meaning a messenger, a messenger they could see. Most commentators think that that was referring to the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night was God's messenger or God's angel. But verse 21 says, be on your guard before him, listen to and obey his voice, and do not be rebellious toward him or provoke him, for he will not pardon your transgression, since my name is in him. And that's the condition. Okay. All right. So, but if you will indeed listen to and obey his voice and do everything that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries.
Promise.
That's a promise. And the condition in that is
Obey his voice and do all he said.
that's right. You got to listen to him and obey him. When my angel goes before you and brings you to the land of the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Canaanite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, I will reject them and completely destroy them.
Promise.
You shall not bow down to worship their gods, nor serve them, nor do anything in accordance with their practices.
Condition.
That's a condition. You shall completely overthrow them and break down their sacred pillars and images of pagan worship.
Condition.
That's a condition. You shall serve only the Lord your God.
Condition.
Condition. And he shall bless your bread and water.
Promise.
I will also remove sickness from among you.
Promise.
Promise.
No one shall suffer miscarriage or be barren in your land.
Promise.
I will fulfill the number of your days.
Promise.
Promise. Can you imagine just those three right there? When it says, I'm going to bless your bread and water, that word bless means make it abundant. You will have an abundance of food. You will, nobody will get sick. Nobody's going to get sick. And nobody will suffer any miscarriages or be infertile, barren, not able to have children. It also says, I will fulfill the number of your days, which means nobody's going to die young. Because fulfilling the number of your days means you'll live to the, fullest. You'll live your full lifespan. Okay, so imagine just those promises right there. Exactly. And the conditions so far? The conditions have not been hard. They're just saying, listen to me and do what I say. Obey my commandments and do what I say. Okay, but it's not over yet. I will send my terror ahead of you, and I will throw into confusion all the people among whom you come, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you in flight. It's a promise. The enemies are all going to run away. Oh, here's my favorite one. I will send hornets ahead of you, which shall drive out the Hivite and Canaanite and the Hittite before you. That's a promise. I will not drive them out before you in a single year, so that the land does not become desolate or due to lack of attention, and the wild animals of the field will not become too numerous for you.
Promise.
Promise. He was going to drive them out slowly and methodically so that the land would not be left uncared for, untilled, or the animals, like if there were no deer season and we couldn't kill deer, we'd be overrun with deer, right? That's what he's saying is that he's going to drive them out slowly so that it's not overgrown by the time you get there, because he's going to drive them out. I will drive them out before you little by little until you have increased and are strong enough to take possession of the land.
Promise.
That's a promise. I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the wilderness to the river Euphrates, for I will hand over the residents of the land to you, and you will drive them out before you.
Promise.
The promise. You shall not make a covenant with them or with their gods.
Condition.
That is a condition. That is a condition. You do not make any kind of blood covenant with anybody in with them or their gods. They shall not live in your land, because they will make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it is certain to be a trap for you.
Condition.
That's a condition. And it's also a promise. If you don't do what I asked, then these people are going to be a snare for you. They're gonna trick you. They're going to get you to worship their false gods. And the main condition that God says, the very first commandment is, you will have no other gods before me. Okay, moving on. Exodus 24. This is in Exodus 24. We're going to read 1 through 11. Anybody want to read 1 through 11?
Then he said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel are worshipped from afar. Moses alone shall come near to the Lord, but the others shall not come near, and the people shall not come up with him. Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the rules, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. He rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in the basins, and half of the blood he threw against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that the Lord had spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the blood and threw it on the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, or whoever, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. There was under his feet as it were a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heavens for cleanness. And he did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. They beheld God and ate and drank.
Okay, so before we get to the obvious question that I think of every time I read this, the first thing I want you to think about is where they say, all that the Lord has said we will do. When they said all that the Lord has said we will do, they were accepting God's covenant. And when they killed the oxen, the sacrifice, and they put the blood on the altar, it also says that he sprinkled the blood, and he said in verse 8, and he sprinkled it on the people, and he said, behold the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you. And all of them said, all that the Lord has said we will do. They were making a blood covenant with God. The same blood covenant that God had made with Abraham when he passed between the animals. And remember what that means? Anybody remember what that means if you break that blood covenant? It's bad.
You're doomed.
You're saying, if I break this covenant, I deserve the death that like this sacrifice. I deserve to be cut asunder as these animals were. And Moses asked him several times, are you sure you want to do this? Because in your homework, you read several instances, even before Exodus 24, where they were whining and complaining. They're standing on the edge of the Red Sea with this big, huge cloud of fire behind them, protecting them, and saying, we're gonna die, we're gonna die, we're gonna die. Not trusting that God was going to bring them across. God brings them across the Red Sea, and they get to the other side, and they're like, whew, that was great. Oh, now we're gonna starve. We're gonna starve, we're gonna starve, we're gonna starve. Like, did you not just, were you not there? I mean, I was there. Were you there? Because you saw the same thing I saw. God did the impossible. And you really think that, anyway, so Moses, he knows these people now. He's been with them just for a few months, and he already knows they're gonna have a problem with this. Are you sure you want to do this? All that the Lord has said, we will do. That was their promise. Okay, so everything that the Lord has said we will do. Now let's look at verse 10 and 11, because verse 10 and 11 says, they saw the God of Israel. Okay, so what's the first thing you think?
That have it.
Go ahead.
They're not
Anybody
dead.
else?
And they're not.
They're not dead. I mean, because doesn't the Bible say that nobody can look on God
Yep.
and live? In Deuteronomy chapter 4, it says, this is Moses reminding them of everything they've been through over the last 40 years. Then the Lord spoke to you from the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of the words, but you saw no form. There was only a voice. So that he's talking about the people down on the mountain. They just saw the voice. I mean, they saw the cloud. So he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to follow, the 10 commandments, and he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. The Lord commanded me at that time to teach you the statutes and judgments so you might do them in the land which you are going over to possess. So pay attention and watch yourselves carefully, for you did not see any form on the day the Lord spoke to you at Oreb from the midst of the fire. And the reason in Deuteronomy he says that they didn't specifically see a form was because if they saw a form, what would they do?
They would die.
Well, they would die, but if they saw what, like, okay, my kids say, what does Jesus look like? What does Jesus look like?
Yeah.
Make an image to worship. Yep.
They would make an image. That's what we've done with crosses, and that's what we've done, I mean, as a people, with various saints, and they make an image. People look at the image and they bow down to an image. And God did not want them to have an image to bow down to. Now, the word saw in verse 10 and 11, because I look up things because, I need to know. The verse saw in verse 11, chaza means to gaze at, perceive, to have a vision of. And my translation says they saw a manifestation of God. So I put this picture on the screen. This is from our lesson of the smoking pot and the flaming torch. That was a manifestation of God. And we don't know what form he was in. What we do know is they knew 100% that it was God. It wasn't somebody else. It wasn't some other, something. It wasn't aliens. It wasn't, they knew 100% that it was God. And it also says that the 70 elders that, went a little closer, that they ate and drank. I don't know if you remember me talking about the covenant process, but part of that covenant process was to share a meal together. There would be a covenant meal that you would share together. And so God I mean, I don't know who supplied dinner. I don't know who catered, but they ate and drank in God's presence as part of that covenant process that they were coming into a joint agreement with God. I just thought that was kind of clear. I just thought that's kind of cool. Anybody else think that's cool or just me?
That's pretty cool.
I think weird things are cool sometimes.
Well,
So
and the same thing with the bread and with Jesus blessing the 2 loaves and the little bit of fish that
yes,
continued, you know, that's the same kind of where it came from. Who knows?
that's right. It's God's catering service.
Yeah.
Best bread and fish you'll ever have. God's catering service. I just came up with that one. Okay. Exodus, let's go over to Exodus 24. This is after they made the blood covenant with God. Exodus 24. We're going to start at verse 12. Does anybody want to read verse 12 through 18?
The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there, that I may give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandments, which I have written their instruction." So Moses rose with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up unto the mountain of God. And he said to the elders, "Wait here for us until we return to you. And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a dispute, let him go to them." Then Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered up the mountain. The glory of the Lord dwelt on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And on the seventh day, he called to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights.
Okay, so after they made the blood covenant with God, Moses went up again. This time he went up to get the tablets of stone. And if you look over the next several chapters, chapter 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, hang on, my page won't turn. All the way to 30, 31 are all the details of the tabernacle. So the tabernacle, which we know is God told Moses, "I want you to build this tabernacle because I'm going to come down and I'm going to dwell there among the people, not on top of a mountain where they can't, I'm going to dwell in this tabernacle." And so he got in this tabernacle. Now Moses was gone. He was gone for 40 days, right? But what could they still see?
Fire.
The cloud that looked like what?
Fire.
For 40 days, there's still this fire on the top of the mountain. So they can see God. They can see his presence right there above them. So, but what did they end up doing while they were waiting?
They're idiots.
They're idiots. They made the golden calf. Now, I have thought about this a lot because originally I was a little bit upset at God. Now I'm not going to say that out loud because that sounds like heresy. But I was thinking of the Ten Commandments, like the movie with Moses. I mean, the movie with Charlton Heston.
Yeah.
I was thinking that they went out to the wilderness and God called Moses up on the mountain to give him the 10 Commandments, but he hadn't told the people all that yet. But that's not the way it went.
No, he had told them.
He had already told them not to make you will not worship any gods besides me. You will not make any graven images for yourself. All those things he had already told them, and they could still see him on top of the mountain. He was still there on top of the mountain. And they were making a golden calf. That's like really stupid. Not only that, but they had made a blood covenant with God saying, all that the Lord has said we will do. All, and what does God have the right to do to them if they break it? Kill them. Kill every last one of them. He would be within his rights to kill every last one of them. That's, well, and I remember thinking God was being a little harsh. And now I realize the fact that God didn't kill all of them, that it's because God was being merciful.
Yeah.
Because they did not deserve that at all. Not only that, later on, God, or while they were making a golden calf, and God was telling Moses how to make the tabernacle and everything, he was telling him to call Aaron and his sons to be priests. Aaron, the same Aaron that helped, that said, bring all your gold to me and I'll make, and then tried to lie about it. Oh yeah, the people wanted something, so I just threw this gold in the fire, and this golden cow walked out. Like,
I had a question about that. When I read
yes.
my homework, I noticed that, okay, I'll not read the whole thing, but you know, they go up, they tell Aaron, get up, make us, and so he says, so Aaron said to them, take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. I was wondering, did men not wear jewelry then either, or what? Like, to me, it kind of stood out that wives, daughters, and sons. I don't know, maybe it's just me.
I don't know. I think he was saying, bring your gold, to me.
Right. Yeah,
And
I just wondered why it left the husband out.
like left the husband out.
Unless to explain it later and I just haven't got there, but I don't
Well,
know.
it says all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. So they may have all, but remember, when they left Egypt, they left with great riches because the Egyptians had given them all their, riches and said, here, take it, leave, just leave. So they were taking all those precious things that God had given them and used it to make a golden calf. Did they deserve any of God's protection? Any of God's good things? None. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look over at Deuteronomy chapter 4, because Deuteronomy, if you get a chance to read Deuteronomy, if you are, you like Exodus, the story of Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, all that, but you don't want to read Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, Deuteronomy is a good Reader's Digest version of everything that happens in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. So we're going to read these passages, and we're going to note descriptive words for God in this passage. So does somebody want to read 23 through 39?
24, 23.
Yeah, Deuteronomy chapter 4.
Chapter 4, 23 through 29.
Oh, we thought you said 24, Carrie.
No, sorry, Deuteronomy chapter 4.
Just Carrie.
It was carried off. She tried to lead us right. We're always take a left.
Anybody want to read it?
39. Somebody want to read? Just read like through I don't know, the first 30 verses. Like 23 through 30.
Okay. Take care lest you forget the covenant of the Lord your God, which he made with you, and make a carved image, the form of anything that the Lord your God has forbidden you. For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God. When you
Two,
father,
consuming fire and a jealous God.
Yep.
Go ahead.
when you father children and children's children and have grown old in the land, if you act corruptly by making a carved image in the form of anything, and by doing what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God, so as to provoke him to anger. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today, that you will soon utterly perish from the land that you are going over the Jordan to possess. You will not live long in it, but you will be utterly destroyed. And the Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and you will be left few in number among the nations where the Lord will drive you. And there you will serve gods of wood and stone, the work of human hands, that neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. But from there you will seek the Lord your God, and you will find him, if you search after him with all your heart and with all your soul. When you are in tribulation, and all these things come upon you in the latter days, you will return to the Lord your God and obey his voice. For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not leave you or destroy you or forget the covenant with your fathers that he swore to them.
Okay, so let's pause for a minute. We've got that the Lord is consuming fire, a jealous God, and where's the other one?
Merciful.
Merciful, merciful, and compassionate. And it says he will not forget the covenant that he made with your fathers. Which covenant is that? Abraham, the covenant he made with Abraham. Even though the covenant that they broke, that they deserved death, he would always keep a remnant because of the covenant he made with Abraham. And he says, when all these bad, horrible things will happen to you, you will seek the Lord and you will find him if you search for him with all your heart. Yeah, exactly. We know that there are a lot of times when we do not seek God until we're in the depths of darkness. And that's when we start looking. And it says, you will return to the Lord your God and you'll listen to his voice. Anybody want to keep reading? 30, we're at 32. 32 through 39.
For ask now of the days that are past, which we're before you since the day that God created man on the earth, and ask from one end of heaven to the other, whether such a great thing as this has ever happened or was ever heard of. Did any people ever hear the voice of a God speaking out of the midst of the fire, as you have heard and still live? Or has any God ever attempted to go and take a nation for himself from the midst of another nation by trials, by signs, by wonders, and by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and by great deeds of terror, all of which the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? To you it was shown that you might know that the Lord is God. There is no other besides him. Out of heaven he let you hear his voice, that he might discipline you. And on earth he let you see his great fire, and you heard his words out of the midst of the fire. And because he loved your fathers and chose their offspring after them, and brought you out of Egypt with his own presence by his great power, driving out before you nations greater and mightier than yourselves, to bring you in, to give you their land for an inheritance, as it is this day. Know therefore today, and lay it to your heart, that the Lord is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. There is no other. Therefore you shall keep his statutes and his commandments, which I command you today, that it may go well with you and with your children after you, and that you may prolong your days in the land that the Lord your God is giving you for all.
right. I know that seems like a long passage and we're getting close to our end of time, but when we think of those descriptive words of God in this passage, we already know that he is a consuming fire. He is passionate about his people, and he is merciful about his people because they did not deserve mercy, and he gave it to them anyway. This is directly showing the character of God. That he, even though they did not deserve, he gave it to them anyway. We have one more reading, and this is kind of long. Psalm 104 and 105 and 106. I might read some of this, but I couldn't pick just a couple of verses out of this. But somebody tell me what Psalms are. Psalms are songs,
Songs.
right? They're songs. So this is like from the hymn book. So think of this as a hymn with 73 verses, or whatever. But one of the reasons that they would teach these songs is they wanted them to remember. And so I'm just going to read, and if somebody else wants to jump in, but I want you to hear the familiarity. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, call upon his name, make known his deeds among the people, sing to him, sing praises to him, speak of all his wonderful acts, and devoutly praise them. Glory to his holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord as their essential need rejoice. Seek and long for the Lord and his strength. Seek and long for his face and remember his presence. Remember the wonderful things which he has done, his amazing deeds and the judgments uttered by his mouth. Okay, let me skip down. Sorry. Verse 9, the covenant which he made with Abraham and his sworn oath to Isaac, which he confirmed to Jacob as a statute and to Israel as an everlasting covenant, saying, to you I will give the land of Canaan as the measured portion of your inheritance, when there are only a few men in number, very few, and strangers in it, and they wandered from one nation to another, from one kingdom to another people. He allowed no man to oppress them. He rebuked kings for their sakes, saying, do not touch my anointed ones and do my prophets no harm. And he called for a famine upon the land of Egypt and cut off every source of bread. And he sent a man before them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. So anyway, it goes through all the things that he did, the great, it's like a story. It's like telling the story of all those things, of what he did. In the Lord's, verse 39, the Lord spread a cloud as a covering by day and a fire to illuminate the night. He satisfied them with bread from heaven, talking about the manna. And then in in Psalm 106, I'm going to read, let's see if I can skip over. Let's start with verse 9. He rebuked the Red Sea and it dried up, and he led them through the depths as through a pasture. So he saved them from the hand of the one that hated them and redeemed them from the hand of the enemy. And the waters covered their adversaries. Not one of them was left. Then Israel believed in his words and they sang his praise. And then one verse later, in verse 13, but they quickly forgot his works. They did not wait for his counsel and purpose, but lusted exceedingly in the wilderness and tempted God in the desert. So he gave them their request, but sent a wasting disease among them. They envied Moses in the camp and Aaron, the Holy One of the Lord. Anyway, so they worshiped a calf. Keep going, keep going. All of those things, they provoked him to anger. They did not destroy the pagan gods that God told them to. And he gave them over to hands of their enemies. And then verse 44 in Psalm 106. Sorry, verse 43. Many times he rescued them, but they were rebellious in their counsel and sank down in their wickedness. Nevertheless, he looked at their distress when he heard their cry, and he remembered his covenant. He remembered his covenant. It's all about covenant. It's all about covenant. It's all about God keeping his promise. The Psalms, if you get a chance to read Psalm 105 and 106, you'll see the whole story. It's almost like the Reader's Digest of the Reader's Digest version of the story. So, okay, so we got homework for next week. I want you to read and write down your observations on the following passages, and I'll read them for you in case you can't see them. Joshua chapter 1, verse 1 through 9. Judges chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. Judges chapter 2, verses 7 through 19. Second Chronicles 7, 11 through 22. And Jeremiah 29.
Okay,
1
write
through
that down.
19. Sorry, did I go too fast?
Yeah.
That's okay.
We
Kira
got it. I got it.
Just
Okay.
send it to us.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. Does anybody have any observations, anything you want to add? Besides for them being whiners, and they didn't deserve, and God didn't deserve that. What was that?
We have lots of whiners.
I think of all the times that God has blessed me, that I knew it was God, and then I'm not as thankful as I should be
Yeah.
for all those things. None of them I deserved. If God were to give me what I deserve, I'd be in trouble. I'd be in big trouble.
Be dead a long time ago.
Exactly. As what was it that my husband used to say? Puff of smoke. What did you say? A puff of smoke and a pair of sneakers left. Oh, so
I've got a question, and I was going to text it to you after a while. Doing these readings for this week's homework,
mhm,
where, and I don't know how, but it came to me that this is the first. We went from Adam and Eve through the flood, through
mhm,
all the people to Abraham, and through all this, and we're just now getting to God's laws. I mean,
mhm.
and I even talked to Pat about it. The first law was don't eat that fruit of that tree. I mean, first law. But between then and here, there's not a lot of talk about any other laws.
Right.
Did people just know? Did they just God was God much more personal, so that they, because Abraham and Jacob and Isaac and all them knew, and Joseph.
Right. But they even then they didn't always do
No,
they didn't have a set down written,
right,
this is what happens if you don't, and this is what happens if you do, and this is what happens if you don't. Because I've wondered that, about Cain and Abel making their sacrifices. Who taught them that they had to make sacrifice?
right.
And how did they know that that's what God wanted? And I've read of some commentaries about right at the couple hundred years after the flood was the Tower of Babel.
Right.
And the Tower of Babel, according to the commentators that I read, was, when they said, let us build a tower to reach the heavens, that they weren't talking about building a tower so that they could get into heaven where God was. They were talking about building a tower to reach God, like God comes down to us, and we, because the kind of tower it would have been the kind where they would have put a thing at the top for their gods to come down and get nourishment and rest, and so they were making God like he was one of them.
Yeah.
It was a misrepresentation of who God was and God's character, because what they knew about God's character from so far was the flood.
Right.
The flood was the last thing they knew about God's character, was he don't mess around, because we know they just did what they wanted, what they thought was right in their own eyes, and that's how they ended up so messed up, like Noah's day.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have any rules to follow.
Yeah.
Because, you know, people like to say that mankind is naturally good and they learn how to do evil.
Mm-mm. No, no, we're not.
Mankind is naturally evil.
Yeah.
And they have to learn how to do good. Um, and that's shown throughout all of, you know, all of Genesis. You have a whole bunch of people that were doing what they thought was right, and in the process they had a incorrect um idea of who God is, and who, you know, who, of what he expects and what he commands. And that's what the Mount Sinai was such a huge deal, because it was the first time God said, okay, I'm going to write this all down for y'all.
Yeah.
I'm going to write it all down so you can know. And the number one thing is, you will have no other gods before me. And it's the same thing that Jesus said is, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. That's the first commandment. Everything else.
Yep.
If you love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength, and you love others, you love others as yourself, that then all the commandments that have ever been written, everything that's ever been written, can all be hung on those two. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor. But it is quite interesting to know, you know, what kind of laws they had, um, and how they determined what was right or wrong. Now we know why they were all messed up most of the times.
Have it.
They didn't
Right.
have those rules. It was all, they were ruled by tribes, by the patriarch of the tribe. If they had a problem, they would come to the patriarch to make a decision. And the patriarch of the family had to lay down the law for their tribe. Um, so, but that's really interesting thing to think about, talk about.
Yep.
And we're out of time, so I'm going to stop our recording, and maybe stop it right now. Bye to the everybody who's watching the recording.